So before I introduce our speaker and we get to it, I want to quickly thank a few folks on Staff Senate, primarily for their commitment to keeping staff development going despite COVID-19 and all the challenges that come with it that you all are familiar with. In particular, I know she just joined our Staff Senate Chair, Charlotte Cook. She's from the Division of Student Affairs. And I'm not sure if she's on the call yet, but our chair-elect and the individual who had the original concept for this meeting, Liz Berry, she's from the Learning Center. I know this next person's on the call, our Secretary Treasurer, and the individual who oversees staff development, Amy Furman. She's from Student Affairs. And real quickly, our Staff Development Committee, Stephen Tudor, who's been the doorman letting everybody in. Amy Armstrong is not on the call yet, but I want to thank her for the advertising and promoting of this event. And then I think Ann Bartz wasn't able to join us today, but she's from the Provost's office, has been helping. So to get to it though, I'm guessing everyone on this call agrees that we have a most topical subject, and our timing couldn't be better with less than a week until Election Day. From my point of view, on one hand, it seems like this is the longest election of my lifetime. On the other hand, it's difficult to believe that millions and millions have already voted, and it actually might come to an end someday. I guess our speaker can talk more about that, but let's get to it. He's going to begin with a little bit of his expert opinion on the presidential election, also talk about a few key races to watch nationally, and we should have plenty of time for questions. And if you could, just ask those questions via the Zoom chat. That way, I think it'll be the most efficient way to get to it and keeping everything under an hour. So our guest speaker, he's a Regents Professor of Political Science. He's the chair of the Department of Technical Communication, and he's the director of the Castleberry Peace Institute. I'll let him take it away. He, again, I don't think we could have a more topical thing today, but please welcome Dr. James Meernik.
Thanks, George. Yeah, it is a very topical subject, obviously 6 days to go before the election. So what I'm going to do is give you kind of an overview of some of the most important developments, predictions as we come up on Tuesday, November 3rd. I should point out that, yeah, my knowledge is more in the area of presidential elections, national elections. I'm less familiar with some of the down ballot races, but certainly, you know, everything that's been in the news and the developments with election processes I've been following very closely. So I'll probably take about 15 or 20 minutes to kind of go over some of the key points and things to be watching in the next few days. And then we'll just kind of open it up for questions, and I'll do my very best to answer. So let's see here. Let me give you kind of a quick overview. So in these presidential election years, these are the big election years because the president and obviously the vice president is up for election or re-election. All of the seats in the U.S. House of Representatives are up for election, 1/3 of the seats in the U.S. Senate. Then you've got numerous state and local offices, not just in Texas, but all across the country. So these will obviously be, sometimes we say, one of the most consequential elections in recent history. I think we can easily say it is the most consequential election, at least since World War II. Some of the things to be watching for, I'm going to talk about the House and the Senate first, and we'll talk a little bit more about the presidency in just a second. So after the presidential election, the key thing to watch in the US government elections is control of the US Senate. So right now, Republicans have 53 out of the 100 seats. Democrats have 47. So Democrats need to achieve a net gain of 4 seats. Now, if Biden wins the presidency and Kamala Harris becomes vice president, then she would be able to cast a tie-breaking vote in the Senate, in which case the Democrats will only need to pick up a net gain of 3 seats. I'm going to quickly take you out to this particular, I hope you're going to get to see this, or am I going to need to, are you seeing this, George, or do I need to share the screen too?
I can see it. I just want to make sure everyone else can.
Okay. Great. So you can hopefully see there. This is from the website. It's called 538, which takes its name from the number of electoral college votes. It's run by a guy by the name of Nate Silver, who I should let you know. His father was one of my dissertation advisors back in Michigan State 37 years ago.
Jim,
Um,
I'm sorry, Jim, let me interrupt real quick. I just know
Sure.
we got 3 people at least on the chat who aren't seeing it. So let me tell you what, let me just try to share my screen. See what we got going here, because I can see it just fine, but
maybe I need to share this specific screen, that just because it's linked to off of the PowerPoint doesn't mean it's
okay.
going to load up.
All right, why don't you give that a shot? Then if not, I can try sharing mine.
Yeah, and actually this one is not so terribly important. I mean, I think I can just kind of go ahead and talk about it. There's a couple others that are coming up that I'll be sure to make sure we switch the screen sharing. Basically, I mean, right now the odds are favoring the Democrats to take control. Like I said, they need to conservatively, they need to flip or gain 4 seats. And so the ones that they're looking at, oh, there we go. So yeah, yeah, that's where we're at. No, I'm sorry, it's the one before that. The slide before, yeah, there we go. Number 2. Yeah. So the Senate races to watch where the Democrats have the best chance of capturing a seat. Susan Collins, probably the last moderate Republican on Capitol Hill. She's in great danger of losing her seat. She's been on Capitol Hill for decades, so looks like she's going to lose. Cory Gardner, Republican in Colorado, looks like he's going to lose. Then you've got one Democratic seat that's in real jeopardy, Doug Jones in Alabama. He got his seat last time on a special election when he was competing against a very unpopular politician. But this time around, it looks like the former Auburn coach, Tommy Tuberville, is going to probably come out ahead there. And so the Democrats would lose that seat, in which case they need to pick up another one. So some of the possibilities are North Carolina, where it looks like right now the Democratic challenger is ahead of a Republican incumbent, Tom Tillis, by 2-3 points in the polling. In Arizona, where Mark Kelly is currently ahead by several points ahead of Martha McSally, who's the Republican incumbent. You've also got races to watch in Georgia. There's actually 2 Senate races in Georgia going on where both the Republicans and the Democrats are neck and neck. Texas has a somewhat competitive race, although it doesn't really look like it's going to be a seat that's going to be won by the Democratic challenger, MJ Hagar. It's in all likelihood, still going to be John Cornyn's to lose. In South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, who's been a steadfast buddy of President Trump, is in the fight for his life against the Democratic challenger, Jamie Harrison. And then in Michigan, there's a bit of a battle there between the incumbent Democrat, Gary Peters, and the Republican challenger. And so look at all those seats on election night. I'd say probably of all of them, Collins, the Collins seat in Maine, the Colorado seat, and the Alabama seats are probably the most likely to flip. Arizona is probably likely to flip too. The other ones are going to be very difficult to predict at this point. In the House of Representatives, the Democrats have, a solid majority right now, and it looks like they'll probably pick up a few more seats and solidify that majority. So it does not look like they're going to lose control of the House of Representatives. And so in all likelihood, Nancy Pelosi will be reelected Speaker of the House. Okay, if you want to go down to the next one. Yeah, there we go. So the big race, the one that everybody's thinking about, talking about all the time, the presidency. So before we kind of get into what it looks like in terms of the polls and the predictions, it's really important to kind of understand how it is that presidents are elected. And probably by now, most of you have heard of this thing called the Electoral College that we have, because we do not directly elect our presidents. The winner of the overall popular vote across the US is not automatically the winner in the Electoral College. In order to win the presidency, you've got to get a majority of those 538 Electoral College voters. And the reason there are 538 is that it's basically every state gets at least 3 electors. You get 2 for the 2 senators. Every state has 2 senators. And then you get additional electors for every House district you have, or every representative that you have in the House of Representatives. So in some small states, like say Wyoming, they only have 1 House seat. They would have 3 Electoral College members. Bigger states like California and Texas, we get tons and tons of electoral college votes. So it adds up to 538 because you also have to include Washington, D.C. While people in Washington, D.C. are not allowed to elect senators, and while they do have a non-voting representative, they are allowed to cast ballots for the president. And so Washington, D.C. also has that minimum number of 3 electoral college voters. And so that's how the presidency is ultimately going to be decided. Whoever gets to 270 electoral college votes first is supposed to be the winner. Now, there's been kind of an interesting set of developments in the last few months about the electoral college. And some of this, I apologize, may kind of seem like it's getting down into the weeds, but it really is hugely important. Although it's very unfamiliar because we've never had to talk about this before. But it's really critical to understand that when we go and vote in Texas or in any state for the president, we are electing a slate of electors to the electoral college. And so, for example, if Trump gets a majority here in Texas, all 38 of those electoral college delegates are then slated to go to Trump. It's you win the popular vote. The rule is in the state, then it's winner take all, and the winner then gets those 38 electoral votes. However, and this is really important, the Constitution does not say, it does not require that the winner of the popular vote get the electoral college votes. So states are allowed to determine for themselves how they want to do this, how they want to decide who those electors are going to be tasked with voting for. Now, through decades of tradition and law, and just the norm has been that we expect that whoever wins the popular vote in the state, that candidate gets the all those electoral votes. However, there have been in Pennsylvania and possibly in other states, some Republican Party officials are exploring the option of having the Republican state legislature override the popular vote if they don't like it and designate their own electors. So that would be one of the first times in our history that's happened. There's nothing in the Constitution that would prevent them from doing that. It would obviously be hugely anti-democratic. But party officials in Pennsylvania have been in talks with the Trump administration to do exactly that. And so it's possible that these talks are going on in other states too. So where you have a legislature that's controlled by one party that doesn't like the outcome of the election, they could decide that, nah, skip it. We're not going to trust the will of the people. We're going to elect our own 21, 38, 3 electors to vote for who we think reflects the will of the people. So far, this has only been taking place among some of the battleground states where they've been working with the Trump administration to see if that would be possible to pull off something like that. Let's go to the next one. Try to give you a little bit of a sense for what's going to happen. So, yeah, if you can take us to that the battleground states there, George, or just hit the if you right click on it and then hit open hyperlink, that should do it. Yeah. So it may take a second. I don't know if it's going to open on your computer, I guess.
It's open on mine. I'm seeing it. So
no, I'm not seeing it, but I can tell you what's on there if others can see it, but maybe they can't.
Huh.
It may be that I think we probably need to share that particular screen.
Yeah, I did that once. Let me try it again, just see if it goes through this time.
Okay, so now I see it.
Okay.
So if you want to scroll down a little bit, you can see this is just kind of a nice little indication of where the presidential, just that map of the US right there, where the presidential candidates are spending their time. Where have they visited? Oops, there we go. And the first thing you notice compared to 2016 is that there are not that many events. There's not a lot going on. In 2016, you would have seen 50 plus events in states like Pennsylvania, Florida, and some of these other battleground states. What you're seeing there is really kind of a reflection of where the election is likely to be won or lost. You can see that Pennsylvania is front and center. That's where both candidates have spent the most amount of time. Florida comes in second. You see a lot of attention paid to North Carolina, Arizona. Now, from what I understand, the Democratic vice presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, is supposed to be coming to Texas, I believe, on Friday. So I think that would mark the first official visit. I don't think this counts visits where the candidate just shows up in a city to have a meeting with donors. But they have to hold some kind of campaign event. But that's basically where the action is. So you can kind of see that while we're getting a lot of campaign ads on TV, the candidates themselves are not really too interested in coming here. And basically what that tells you is that both sides assume that, in the case of Texas, it's going Republican. No matter what the polls might say, they think it's going Republican. California, it's going Democrat. So, so let's get out of that one, and then we'll go to the next one, the battleground states. And you'll have to, I apologize, you'll have to kind of, I'm sorry, 270 to win. Yep. Have to share that screen again. This is a really handy one. Because what it does is, if you just kind of start to scroll down and kind of ignore all the shoe ads down there. Or maybe get some ideas for the holidays.
Yeah, I might have been looking at shoes recently, obviously.
Yeah. So yeah, actually go to the first one up there. It's there's one right above it. There's one map of the US right above it. Yeah.
Oh.
Huh. That's interesting. So yeah, it doesn't want to show us that picture. So
let's see. There we go.
Oh, there it is. Okay, so this is basically this is the average of all the different predictions. So as you can imagine, I mean, there's lots of people out there in my world of political science, in the world of media and punditry. Everybody's out there trying to, come up with their predictions for who's going to win. And so I'm a big fan of these ones that kind of combine all of these forecasts into one. Because some predictions may tend to, oversample Democrats, some may oversample Republicans. And so you may get different results. But if you kind of pool them all together, average them, take a consensus, you kind of get, I think, a better picture. So you can see there kind of based on the colors in the map, those states that are kind of, I guess, tannish brown, those are the battleground states. You see there Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida. That's kind of the consensus. Now, other maps you may see, a state like Iowa or Ohio leaning a little bit Republican. The dark blue states are the ones that are heavily favored to lean or to vote Democratic. Really no kind of contest there. The slightly less dark blue are the ones that are heavily favored to go Democratic. Light blue, slightly favored to go Democratic. And so you see there, especially important to notice that the key states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin that were part of what used to be called that blue wall that the Democrats had, where they always kind of held on to those kind of Midwest, upper Midwest, Great Lakes, Rust Belt states. Well, Trump defied all expectations in 2016 and narrowly won in each of those states, sometimes by only a few tens of thousands of votes. And Minnesota is a state that typically votes Democratic, but there's some kind of hope that the Republicans had sort of earlier on in the year that they might be able to turn that one. But all those states are still kind of leaning Democratic. And then you see kind of the same sort of color scheme of the Republicans, the darker the red, the more heavily favored the Republican candidates to win. And then as the shade grows lighter, kind of the less certainty there is about it. And if you're looking closely, you may also notice a couple of weird looking states that have kind of a thatched marking. See, they're right in the middle of the US, Nebraska, and its 5 electoral votes. Then way in the upper right corner, you see Maine. So those states do something a little bit different. It's kind of an odd system. So they have kind of a hybrid system. So on the one hand, if a candidate wins the statewide vote, so if Biden wins the statewide vote in Maine, he gets 3 electoral votes from Maine. But then for each congressional district in Maine and each congressional district in Nebraska, the winner of the popular vote gets an additional, in that district, gets an additional electoral vote. So in Maine, for example, I mean, they only got 2 congressional seats. So, I'm sorry, 1. And so what happens is, if Biden wins the overall vote, then it's quite likely that he's going to get, all 4 votes. In Nebraska, the Republicans are predicted to win the overall vote. There's some chance that Biden may win in one of those districts, in which case, he would get 1 electoral vote, and the Republican and Trump would get the other 4 electoral votes. So Nebraska and Maine kind of split their votes up in weird ways, and there's some kind of scenarios out there in which those states could really play a key role if it comes down to kind of a tie, which is not entirely out of the question. And I see someone says, that's why Trump was in Omaha last night? Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly why he was in Omaha, because that's where the Democrats have the best chance of picking up one of Nebraska's electoral votes. So, again, there's some really kind of highly particular scenarios in which those couple of states could play a key role. But, again, we'll have to wait till election day. So I got one more slide to kind of talk about some issues to watch coming up. And so these, there we go. I've never had to put anything like this slide up before. I've never had to talk about anything like this before in American government. Never been an issue before in any kind of election. But there you have it. Things to watch out for. Active efforts to suppress voters, which can occur through a lot of different mechanisms. So for example, here in Texas, the counties had been allowed to position as many boxes around within their county for people to drop off their ballots if they were afraid of going into the polling place. So some places like Houston had as many as 11 or 12 locations because it's a huge city with millions of people. Abbott suddenly, several weeks back, decided, nope, 1 per county. And then there ensued several weeks worth of battles in the courts. And you saw a lot of partisan decision making that ultimately came down to the Texas Supreme Court. And I think it was just yesterday or the day before even, they finally came down on the side of Abbott, said, yep, he gets to say, if you're only allowed to have 1, that's that. So there's been a lot of other kind of things like that where there have been efforts to try to restrict voting. There have been efforts like Abbott has made here in Texas to expand early voting, but there have also been efforts made to make it more difficult for people to vote, especially in areas that tend to lean Democratic. Poll watchers, something else that people are very concerned about this year. So in 1982, the Republican Party took part in some poll watching in the state of New Jersey and got rather belligerent, kind of challenging people who were going to the polls, questioning them. And as a result of that illegal behavior that they demonstrated in New Jersey in 82, there was a consent decree with the courts that kept them from engaging in that kind of aggressive poll watching until this year. And so there's a great deal of fear that you're going to have some of these poll watchers show up at voting places and start challenging people, saying, you don't look like an American to me, or I want to see your driver's license, or whatever it might be. Now, campaigns are allowed to have official poll watchers, but they have to go through training and they have to be registered. You can't just show up at some sort of polling location and just say, hey, I'm just going to stand around here and be a poll watcher. But no, you have to go through the process. And so there have been several attempts already by some Trump supporters, especially in Pennsylvania, to show up in places where they were not allowed to be. And there's been complaining about that. In Michigan, a court decision that just came down yesterday made it legal for people to carry weapons into polling places. So there's some concern that, especially given the fact that there was this attempt to kidnap the governor of Michigan by these right-wing militias, that you may find more of these kind of these white supremacist groups showing up at the polls, brandishing their weapons and trying to intimidate people. So that's a huge concern. Supreme Court. has become more of a concern, especially in the last couple of days. So they have in the past, not always, kind of depends upon their Chief Justice Roberts, but in the past, there's been a lot of fair amount, I should say, a fair amount of partisan decision making. When Roberts has sided with the three liberal members of the court because he thinks that some of the states have gone too far in trying to restrict voting, then they've been able to kind of keep it at bay. But when Roberts has sided with the conservative majority, they've been able to keep in place some restrictive laws. So for example, there was a case that came up from Wisconsin in which the state wanted to allow votes to be counted for some days after Election Day, providing that they were postmarked on or before Election Day. And the US Supreme Court said no. And so that was kind of to be expected, a little troubling, but to be expected. But what really kind of caught people's attention and caused a lot of alarm was part of the opinion by Justice Brett Kavanaugh, in which he said that it's a legitimate concern for states to be worried that you may be counting ballots on election night that are mostly going to be from people voting in person. And then, you may look like you're ending up with one result on election night. It may look like, oh, Trump is ahead in Pennsylvania or Trump is ahead in Michigan because the vote counting on election day is going to be focused on in-person voting where everyone expects Republicans and Trump voters to do better. And so what Kavanaugh said was that, if that's what happens, if it looks like one person is ahead on election night, and then you've got to wait for 3 or 4 days to count all the absentee ballots, all the mail-in votes and things like that, then that could, he said, flip the election and cause all sorts of chaos and concern. So he was kind of taking an argument straight out of one of Trump's conspiracy theories. Important to point out, as one of the other justices said, there's no flipping elections. There's no official word on election night. That always comes later from the states. When we get on election night are media reports, media predictions. So they're in no way official. So just because CNN and every other network forecast that looks like Trump or Biden's going to win on election night, that in no way whatsoever makes it official. It all depends on when the states are done counting their votes. That's when it becomes official. So this notion that somehow you would flip kind of assumes that there's some kind of legitimacy or truth to the results that you happen to see on election night at a particular point in time. And that's just simply not the case. It'd be no different than calling a football game in the third quarter and saying, wow, man, boy, this our team, they're not going to win, so let's just call it quits. Like, no, you wait until the game ends. But there's some fear that what might happen is there might be attempts to kind of shut down the counting of the ballots in order to preserve the outcome that we see on election night. Got foreign disinformation, which we are expecting to kind of be hitting its peak about now. We know that the Russians especially, but also the Iranians and the Chinese have been doing a variety of things. And really kind of two things in particular, though, you should be aware of. One is that they're probing our electoral systems to see what they can get away with. They want to see how far can they get into it. They haven't changed any votes. They haven't kind of been able to break into important systems. But we know, that is the IT folks at all these state level election offices know that they've tried to get in there. We can monitor those things. So to date, they haven't done anything, but it's clear they're poking around. So they're basically like burglars who are kind of casing a bank or something before they decide whether or not to rob it. The other thing that they're certainly doing is spreading division and confusion. And the weird thing now is that last time around, when the Russians were doing this, they had to make this stuff up. They were just, creating crazy stories. Now they're just basically retweeting President Trump's conspiracy theories and a lot of the crazy things that we ourselves are saying, most of which tend to originate with President Trump. And so they're just retweeting that stuff and trying to sow as much division and chaos as possible and to make it seem like the election's going to be in doubt and just try to make our country ungovernable. And that's great for them. The more ungovernable we are, the more distracted, debt-ridden, and unhealthy we are, certainly better for the Russians. The Chinese are also involved in it, but they tend to kind of play more of a long game. They're not necessarily going to jump in so heavily that they get caught, in which case I think they have a lot more to lose. The Russians clearly don't care, and they've been at this game for a while. They've been doing it not only to us but to our allies in Eastern Europe, and frankly, the president has never really called them out on it. So they continue to do this stuff and to get away with it. So those are issues with voter suppression, confusion. You've got issues with vote counting. We're going to have mail-in ballots, which are going to take a while to count, so there may be delays. There's issues with the ballot boxes, like I talked about here in Texas. There was an issue out in California recently where, it's the state that authorizes, the design and the construction of these boxes and where they're going to go, and they're all state property. Well, the Republican Party decided that they were just going to create their own boxes and put them around and then slap a paper sign on them that said official. That was illegal, and the state was trying to work with them nicely, but it's just kind of another example how you got one of the parties who's really just trying to play dirty and confuse people. But again, I think it's a lot of this is our own kind of our own worst enemy and passing around a lot of rumors and disinformation. And then I think you also see a lot of problems with the voter, different ways in which to kind of suppress the vote count. So, for example, in some states, Republicans are passing laws that mandate that the votes can only be counted beginning on election day, but then have to be finished then, which is very unrealistic for a lot of states. And the contradiction is not lost on people, but they don't really seem to care. So I'm afraid to say that the Republican Party is really kind of adopted a lot of voter suppression techniques, and tries people might to identify instances of major in-person voter fraud or other kinds of voter fraud. It's just not there, and I can point you to any number of studies that have found that. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't find some kinds of discrepancies. Sometimes you will find people who are registered to vote who don't belong there. That's a problem in every single state. You have people who have died who need to be removed. You have people whose names have changed and need to be removed. You have people with the same last name as a father who need to have that corrected. But most of the problems that people have found in voter registration have been those kinds of errors. They haven't been any kind of product of attempts at swaying the vote or anything like that. And furthermore, if you're caught voting illegally, for example, if you vote twice, which is illegal, or if you're a felon who has not properly served all their time, you get sent off to prison. So, for example, there was a woman here back in, I say it was the 2016 election. She had served her time in prison, but she still had some kind of parole business to take care of. She thought she could vote. She thought she was perfectly okay to vote. She's out of jail. She's a regular citizen. Everybody said, go vote. So she voted. She's now spending the next 5 years in jail because of that. So to think that somehow there's going to be a lot of voter fraud when the benefits of changing around a vote or two, when you've got tens of millions and the potential penalties are so huge is really kind of defies logic. So again, we can't deny that there might not be some opportunities in some places among some people, especially with kind of local races for hinkiness. But by and large, all of these claims about voter fraud have been way overblown, and no one has been able to find any evidence of any kind of widespread in-person voter fraud in the past, or any likelihood of voter fraud in this election. So it's just kind of a lot of bogus stuff. So I will stop there, and you can start asking me questions.
Jim, to get the questions going, I actually got a few in early, and a couple of them you've answered, but one came in from Holly in the College of Education, and she's asking very apropos based on what you finished on, but given the current situation with so many mail-in ballots, can we expect to know who will be the next president by the end of election night?
It's possible. Nothing's completely out of the question. I think it will depend a lot on states that would give an indication that Biden might be heading for a landslide. So, for example, if you see Florida go for Biden, then not only does that obviously give him those electoral college votes, but it also may be a harbinger of a major turnout for Biden in other states. So if you see something like that happening, then there's a good chance we're going to know on election night. It really just kind of depends upon, kind of the makeup of the folks who are voting right now and the makeup of the folks who are voting on election day. It's pretty clear in most states that because you can tell in most states who's requested absentee ballots, that the people who've requested absentee ballots are heavily Democratic. And so in states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, you're likely to see probably on election night the early returns coming in favoring Trump, but as the mail-in ballots come in, they're going to favor Biden. Now, if the in-person votes favor Biden, then in those states, or if you start seeing like a Biden victory in places like again, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, then we'll know election night. There's just so many unknowns right now. There's just so many different ways this thing could go that it's anybody's guess. And again, there may be some states where we have a pretty good indication of who those electoral college votes are going to go for, but that still doesn't stop some of the state parties from trying to subvert that result.
Jim, there's 3 or 4 really good questions on the Electoral College in the chat. I think the first one, if I have it right, is at 1:31 p.m. from Devin Axtman. Can you see those okay?
Actually, I need to call them up. Let me let's see. And
I can read them to you if it's easier.
Actually, why don't you go ahead and read it while I'm scrolling?
Sure. The first one is again from Devin Axtman. When does the Electoral College actually vote?
It's a good question. I believe the date is December 12th, but you could probably Google that and figure out pretty quickly. But it's not for a while yet. It's not until December. So I think it's December 12th. And again, that's when they're supposed to vote. Whether or not, if you run into an issue with competing slates of electors, it may get delayed, but that's when it's supposed to happen.
Another Electoral College question from Joe Nunnally. Why do we never see stories about the people who get to vote in the Electoral College? No stories in the papers, or John Doe or Jane Doe, and how many times they've served in that role?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's really just because even though, I mean, the positions in terms of kind of their honorary importance are really big. I mean, your votes are deciding the election. But they're supposed to be foregone conclusions. So it's not like anybody has any kind of independent power. And basically what the parties do is that they choose electors from within their ranks. And so the Democrats will have their electors lined up for Texas. Republicans will have their electors lined up. And depending upon obviously who wins, then one slate gets to go vote and the other doesn't. They're really people who are kind of party faithful, people who maybe have done something significant, people for whom the party wants to give some kind of reward. Occasionally you'll see maybe some kind of little feature story in the local news, but yeah, I mean it's not very consequential at all unless you have what we call a faithless elector, which is somebody who decides that they're just going to vote for some other candidate. So, I think there was, for example, like was it Oregon in 2016, which is a slate of electors that was supposed to go to Hillary Clinton. I think one of them decided that he hated Hillary and he voted for Bernie Sanders. And so you get maybe 1, sometimes 2 of those each election, and it never really changes anything. Although it does kind of cause people to go, huh, what? And just kind of leads to more calls for reform because it is such an oddball system.
Sticking on the electoral college theme, and another one from Devin Axtman, how would a state like Pennsylvania change their electoral college rules so it's not the state popular vote, a legislative vote, for example?
All they have to do is have the state legislature pass a law.
And one follow-up to the I forget the exact term of it, but a electoral college member who voted against what the rules dictate, would that legal chain following that just be a disaster if it, you know, theoretically change the outcome of election? Would it just be complete chaos most likely if it was done in mass?
Yeah, if they're faithless electors in mass, then yeah, then that would throw the whole thing into confusion. And generally, I mean, it's, the parties are picking these people, and so they're picking people that they really trust, and they're generally people who want to have a future in the party. You go and vote for somebody else other than the one you were pledged to vote for, your future in the party probably isn't great. So there's kind of a lot of built-in incentive to kind of play by the rules, but occasionally you get some of these folks like that. Like I said, they rarely affect the outcome of the election. They never have, but it does still kind of make us wonder, why do we even bother with this kind of a system?
I don't have it in front of me, but a question that came in earlier was essentially if Biden wins, the logic is that there'll be some sowing of discord, among the Trump faithful. And what happens if the inverse of that happens? Do you still see some flare-ups nationally?
If Trump were to win, I think like last time, you see a lot of disappointment among the Democrats, but I think that if there's a clear electoral college winner and it has not been the result of voter suppression, then at this point, I don't see there being much likelihood that Biden is going to do anything. Biden has never claimed that he would not accept the results of the election. Trump has said time and time again that he's only going to accept the results if they're fair, and he insists that he's going to win. And so anything where he doesn't win is therefore unfair. So it is an open question as to whether or not he's going to accept the results. Now, if it's a landslide and there's no doubt, then it may be some of the party leaders like Mitch McConnell may come to him and say, look, you lost it, you got to concede. If it's closer, but still pretty clear, I think you can expect that there will be lots and lots of court battles. And depending upon the outcome of the court battles, then you may see more people going into the streets on both sides. I think if you find state legislatures overriding the popular vote and choosing their own delegates, yeah, then you're going to see protests in the streets that would make the Black Lives Matter protests this summer look like nothing in comparison. I think if there was an attempt to kind of steal the election and subvert the popular vote, there'd be a huge outcry.
If I gave you $20 and sent you to Vegas to pick a date when we'll know who won definitively, and there's a concession speech, would you be willing to pick a day?
My best guess at this point is that we would know by the end of the week. I think there's probably about a 90% certainty of that. I don't think Trump will ever concede, though. He's never done it in his life. I don't see it happening now. So, got to be honest. If he does, it will be he'll manage to come out and say that, I don't accept the results, but for the good of the party, because Mitch McConnell told me, I'm not going to pursue any further court challenges. I think that may be the best we can get. But we'll see. We'll see. There's just a lot of things that have never happened before in our country's history, and certainly everything with the pandemic, the early voting, and all the other problems you've had have just made this a really, really difficult election to predict and a really tense one.
Any other questions from the group? Well, in that case, I think we can probably give everybody at least a few minutes of their day back. But I for one enjoyed it, and a lot of the stuff was a good civics reminder since I haven't had it since 7th grade. It's it's been fun for me personally, at least.
Thanks. Yeah, it's always fun to talk about this stuff. So I'd say start tuning in. I'd say maybe about 8 o'clock our time. Will be 9 o'clock Florida time. We should start to know some of the results from there. But then watch out for those Senate races. And then I didn't even, obviously mention anything about the Texas House and Senate races. The Democrats are pouring a lot of money into trying to flip control of the Texas legislature. So there's going to be interesting races up and down the ballot to see just, how many people are coming out and who they're coming out for. But actually, let me close on one last kind of really sort of positive thing. And that is that the turnout in Texas in this early voting is just absolutely smashing everybody's expectations. I think we're now getting close to 90% of the total vote in 2016. And so that we have that many people who voted already, I think really speaks well to how seriously people are taking this election. I know Denton County has been one of the counties where there's been a huge amount of voting. So across the country, Texas is leading the way in terms of reaching that point at which we get to the total number of folks who voted in 2016, and then Denton County is leading the way here in Texas. So Denton County is kind of leading the way in the U.S. some way. So hats off to Denton County.
One final call for questions among the group before we break up. Well, in that case, thank you again for your time. Very enlightening. I'm sure I can speak for everybody in this case, and say we appreciate it, and it's going to make Tuesday night all the more fun.
It'll be interesting. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks again.
Thank you.